Welcome back into the ceramic studio, and in today's video we are going to be making a small pitcher. Here we are straight into the wedging process, and the entire point of wedging is to get rid of air bubbles and to make the clay smooth and homogeneous. If you have any air bubbles in the clay as you're going to be throwing it, you'll feel them and it's going to throw the clay off center. As you can see here, I'm shaping the ball into a clay before I put it on the bat. This is to prevent any air bubbles from getting trapped in between the bat and the clay. When you throw the clay onto the bat, you want to firmly press it down and kind of wiggle it and make sure that it's stuck on there, because if it's not and you start throwing, your project can just slide off. Before I do anything, I want to make sure my hands and the clay are wet so that there isn't friction during the centering process. You're never going to be able to get the clay perfectly smooth and in the center, so you'll do this thing called coning. And with coning, I'll use my left hand and dig it into my waist. I'll use this and push into the center of the clay while I use my right hand to squeeze with equal pressure back into the middle. This just forces the clay to be smooth and in the center. I like to cone a couple times because it makes the clay smoother and it also helps wedge on the bat, thus preventing more air bubbles if I missed any during the table of wedging. Now that I'm happy with how centered the cone is, I'll use my right hand and my left hand, and again, staying stable, to push down and force the clay into this puck shape. I have my biscuit and the bat all cleaned off, so I'm going to start using a sponge on my finger to push into the center of the clay. This stage is actually called opening, and you're opening the clay to get ready for pulling, in which pulling you're going to actually get the height of the pot. I feel pretty close to the right thickness of that base, but I'm going to use this little needle tool to check the actual thickness of the bottom. If it's too thick, it won't dry right and it can crack in the kiln, and if it's too thin, it'll just be weak. I'll adjust the opening and compress the bottom, and compressing the bottom does decrease the thickness a little bit, but you're actually increasing the density of the bottom, thus adding more and more strength. The shape I have now is more of a donut, and this isn't good for pulling because the walls are so inconsistently thick it's just gonna rip off. And doming is just taking this donut and making the walls uniform. This is really important because that uniformity is what sets us up for success during pulling. For this process, I'll take my elbow and dig it into my waist to, again, keep that stability, and I'll use my left hand to hold the inside as I start pulling. Then I'll use my right hand with the sponge to dig a groove into the bottom of the clay. The clay at the bottom is now thinner because of the groove, and the clay above it is thicker. So when I raise both of my hands up at a steady pace, it forces the clay as it spins around to increase in height. Now, it's important to note during the pulling process that you want to do this relatively quickly, within about 3 pulls. If you do it much more than that, the clay gets weaker because it absorbs more water. I started getting a wobble as I kept pulling, and this is completely normal. Other than that, it does stretch out a little bit, so I'll do this thing called collaring, where I basically wrap my hands around it and raise them so that it forces the clay to be a little smaller and to be a little more stable. To keep gaining height, you'll just do a mix of collaring and pulling and collaring and pulling. Again, you don't want to do this too much, but as you can see later in this video, I did do it too much. Sometimes I'll even use this wooden rib tool to guide the inside hand into a little bit straighter of a line. Here's where my constant pulling and collaring kind of bites me in the butt, and as you see me collar right here, there becomes this ripple in the middle of the pot. It's because the clay is so soft and it's absorbed so much water because I've taken so long. So the torque on the top versus the spinning wheel on the bottom induces that little twist. I was able to fix this a little bit just by pulling more gently and using the sponge to slowly bring the shape back. I've kind of fixed it a little bit more so I can start shaping it. With shaping, it's no different than pulling, other than you kind of pull in a direction, and with that you can collar to shape as well. So the top third I'll collar in a little bit so I have a belly with a smaller opening for the top of the picture. The picture got a little bit wobbly, probably because I took so long and I wasn't perfectly stable, so the best way to fix this is I'll use my very pointer finger to then pull just very precisely and slowly. It's easier to keep my pointer finger still, and there's less surface area for there to be any torque on the picture. I'll continue throughout the shaping process until I get the desired form of the picture. When you collar in clay and pull it and collar more, the very top can become unstable and you'll see it actually bobs up and down. It's completely normal, and I'll use this needle tool to just trim off the very top portion. Because I pulled and collared for so long, the clay just got too weak, so I used a hairdryer to remove moisture. And removing moisture isn't perfect, but it does help increase the strength of the pot to allow me to work with it a little bit longer. Now that the clay is just a little bit drier, I can add more water to then finalize the shape. I want to prep the edge for pouring, so I'll use my thumb and my pointer finger to brace the rim, and then I'll use my pointer finger on my right hand to slowly move back and forth and stretch the edge downwards for the liquid to come out. I'll use this red rubber rib tool to scrape all the slip off of the picture. It just helps it dry more evenly and quickly. For the bottom, I know I'm not going to be able to trim it very much because of this shape, so I'll use this wooden knife tool to carve out a little shape and get rid of that skirt of clay on the bottom. Over at the table, I'll use about a quarter pound of clay to start creating the handle of the pot. As always, it needs to be wedged to make sure there aren't any air bubbles and to make sure that the clay is soft and ready to work with. I'll start the handle by rolling the clay into a nice uniform cylinder, and then I'll use my forearm to roll it back and forth into a longer, more uniform strip. All that needs to be done for the handle is to pull it into the actual shape of a handle. So I'll use the cylinder, and I'll use my thumb and my pointer finger in parallel to squeeze and pull quickly. This creates a more of an oval shape for the cross section, and it makes the handle more comfortable to use. A few things should be noted during this process. You want to make sure the clay in your hands are really wet so that you don't have any friction, because that friction can rip off the clay. The other thing you want to note is I'll constantly rotate my left hand with the clay 180 degrees so that I'm not pulling in one spot and I'm consistently switching it up and making sure that the handle is even. We're coming up on mistake number 2, and in an ideal world you want to let both of the handle and the picture dry to about leather hard. This state allows you to shape it a little bit, and yet it'll also mold and dry at the same time. What I did is I let the picture dry too much to where it was completely dry and the handle was still leather hard. So they will dry unevenly, and the chances of it not working and breaking in the kiln are a lot higher. I used a damp sponge to add water to the dry picture so that when I put the handle on, they can dry a little bit better. This isn't perfect nor ideal, but it does decrease the chances of failure. I'll use either a rib tool or a knife tool or even a needle tool to shape this handle as I continue comparing the look of it to the actual picture. I'm happy with the handle at this point, so I'll use this metal rough edged rib tool to scrape these lines into the picture and the handle. These lines increase the strength of the bond when I attach the pieces together. I'll use this jar full of slip, and slip is just muddy clay, to then brush onto the area of contact. As the moisture leaves that slip, that's what creates the bond between the two pieces. As I'm attaching this handle to the picture, I'll push it on really firmly, and I'll even wiggle it side to side to really mix in the two different clays with the slip. All that's left is to now use different tools like my finger or a brush or even like this yellow rib tool that you see to blend in the handle and make it look like it belongs with the picture. Because of the lip of the actual picture, I wasn't able to trim it as smoothly as I would have liked, so I came back with this yellow sponge to kind of blend in and smoothen out the outside. Some key takeaways are make sure that you let the picture and the handle dry uniformly, and in this case I would have made the handle a little bit wider. If you liked this video, go ahead and check out my other ceramics videos. If you're feeling a little more adventurous, I do other things. Lastly, if you feel as though my videos bring value to you, subscribe. It helps me out and it keeps you in the loop. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.